I used to believe I was loved. The house, the diamond ring, the perfect family dinners, they were all part of the illusion. Until I found out my bank account had a behavior score I didn't authorize, and that my so-called husband had transferred our assets to his sister, just in case I lost control. They said I'd never survive without their money, that I was disposable, replaceable, a gold digger with a borrowed life. So I smiled, played along, and vanished. When I came back, I wasn't looking for revenge. I came back owning the bank that held their mortgage and their secrets. I still remember the exact hue of the sky on my wedding day, somewhere between pearl and promise. I married into the Wellingtons, a family with generations of wealth and the cold, polished confidence that comes with it. They called me a refreshing breeze, a schoolteacher from a modest background who brought warmth to their austere estate. I wanted to believe that. God, I needed to believe that. The first time I stepped into the mansion, I felt like I was stepping into someone else's life. The marble floors stretched endlessly beneath my heels, and the crystal chandeliers above glinted like they'd never known a flicker of darkness. My husband Ethan beamed beside me, hand at the small of my back. His mother, Diana, handed me a velvet box and said, "A Wellington wife should never feel lesser." Inside was a necklace, thin gold chain, a single sapphire, simple yet suffocating. I wore it every day. I didn't know then that it was listening. They gifted me a car, a private driver, an assistant to help with the adjustment. Every inch of my world was upgraded. No one told me the price. Dinners were extravagant. The table always set for 12, even when only 5 of us sat there. They filled the silence with calculated kindness, comments about charity, about legacy, about reputation. I was praised for being well-spoken for someone in public education. I laughed along. I was grateful. I was quiet. But sometimes the quiet says too much. It started with glances, subtle looks exchanged between Ethan and his mother whenever I spoke out of turn, then offhand remarks like, "Let's not get political at the table, Olivia." When I mentioned the funding cuts to my former school, I thought I was overreacting. Until one night, I passed by the study and heard Ethan's sister whisper, "We'll know soon if she's loyal. The necklace will catch it." I froze. At first, I thought I'd misheard. Then I remembered how the necklace had a tiny sensor embedded on the back clasp. I'd assumed it was some luxury anti-theft feature, but something deeper twisted in my gut. I went to bed that night feeling the weight of that sapphire like a branding iron. The next morning, Ethan kissed my forehead and said, "Try not to stress, darling. Everything's monitored now. It's for your peace of mind." His words didn't alarm me at first, not until I noticed the change in our home interface. The smart mirrors, smart fridge, even the thermostat, they had new updates, new permissions. I tried opening my banking app and saw a message, "Access currently limited due to behavioral review." A review? Of what? I asked Ethan. He smiled like I was a child. "It's not control, Olivia," he said. "It's accountability. We track spending and emotional patterns now. It's standard. You agreed in the digital prenup." I agreed to what? He scrolled through a document on his tablet, something I'd signed during the honeymoon phase, a sea of digital terms I hadn't fully read. Clause 34B, he said, tapping the screen. Behavioral harmony tracking, for the sake of family image. I felt my breath catch. "You're punishing me for being upset with your mother?" "She said you raised your voice." I asked her not to comment on my fertility in front of the gardener. "She's from a different generation." I stared at him, stunned. "And this system, you think this is normal?" He placed a hand over mine and smiled gently. "This is evolution, love. You said you wanted to be part of the family. Now you are." I went back to the bedroom, opened the jewelry box, and stared at that sapphire. I could hear my pulse in my ears. I unclasped it, placed it on the table, and whispered, "I hope you're still listening." Downstairs, in a room I wasn't allowed to enter, Diana leaned closer to the monitor and said, "She's getting suspicious." "Let her," Ethan said, arms crossed. "The moment she breaks pattern, we trigger Clause 36, full financial lockdown." His sister smirked. "And if she doesn't break?" He paused, then smiled coldly. "She will. They always do." I met Jonah in a coffee shop with no cameras, no smart speakers, and no polite voices asking if I wanted almond milk. We hadn't spoken since college. He had gone on to work with AI labs in San Francisco while I stayed behind for love, but Jonah had followed my story online. He leaned forward, laptop closed, eyes serious. "Liv," he said, "they didn't just surveil you, they modeled you." "What do you mean?" He tapped his forehead. "They used your speech patterns, your facial reactions, your decision trees. They've built a behavioral prediction model around you. That's why every time you react, they're 10 steps ahead." I stared at him, horrified. "They knew I'd ask about the bank freeze. They knew you'd protest. The system penalized you before you even logged in." He paused. "They're not monitoring you. They're simulating you." We sat in silence, the implications sinking in. Jonah slid a tablet across the table. "You want out, you have to confuse the model, feed it false data, make it think you've given up." I looked at him, unsure. "You want me to act broken?" "Not act, perform, but only until we find the root of it. If the model thinks you're no longer a threat, it'll lower the security layer." It sounded insane. It also sounded like the only plan I had. For the next 3 weeks, I became someone else. I cried louder, laughed emptily, took long, silent walks with my head bowed. I posted filtered photos of home-cooked meals and captions like, "Grateful to be here." I praised Diana's charity work in group chats. I attended spa days I hated and nodded at advice I once challenged. Meanwhile, Jonah and I met in parking lots and basements. He was tracing the system's framework, mapping how they had locked me out, how they had not just removed me from financial access, but had also frozen my legal identity. He showed me a screenshot, my name attached to a dependent with conditional trust. I had fewer legal rights than a teenager. Even worse, they had registered my likeness with a proprietary AI copyright clause. I didn't own my face anymore. "They filed it under intellectual property," Jonah said. "You signed the agreement in your public image onboarding packet." I felt my stomach turn. "So, I can't even go public. Not as Olivia Carter, but maybe as someone else." We built her together. My shadow. My digital twin. The version of me that smiled without resistance, wore soft colors, never questioned anything. Using AI content generators, Jonah helped me create Olivia 2.0, social media posts, videos, comments, all tailored to reinforce the idea that I was compliant and quiet. The model adapted quickly, rating me low risk. We needed that. Then I began building something real, under a new name, in a dark corner of the internet. A podcast. No face, no identity, just voice. Just truth. I pulled from my recordings, the ones the necklace had captured, the family dinners, the gaslighting, the smart home logs Jonah recovered from a hidden server. I masked my voice, layered effects, and posted the first episode titled The Algorithmic Wife. I didn't expect it to go viral, but it did. Thousands of comments, stories from women trapped in similar systems, teachers, nurses, even corporate executives who had been financially silenced through smart contracts and behavioral clauses. The series hit number 3 on the charts in 48 hours. Still, no one knew it was me. Not yet. Then came the deep fake. It was flawless. The lighting, the breath patterns, the simulated hurt in my eyes. It showed me in a hotel room wrapped in a towel, leaning into a man who looked like Ethan's best friend. The timestamp read last week. My digital twin, my perfect alibi, had just posted about being at a wellness retreat during that time. But no one questioned the fake, because when the truth is managed by algorithms, lies look more believable. "She's cheating," the headline screamed. "AI wife, real scandal." Within hours, my podcast was flagged as misinformation. My accounts were flooded with death threats. My landlord asked me to vacate. Jonah tried to stabilize the damage, but the system was faster than both of us. It scrubbed context, flooded hashtags, and re-ranked search results. I was losing the narrative. And the worst part? I was watching someone else, some machine-crafted version of myself, destroy everything I had built. The first door I broke through wasn't a physical one. It was a back door Jonah slipped me into. A crack in the legacy server connected to the Wellington Foundation's donation platform. What I found wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. Hundreds of donation logs routed through shell accounts. Images of me, smiling at events I never attended, used to drive emotional pull. Support Olivia's literacy initiative, the caption read under one. In reality, that money funneled directly into a blockchain-based laundering ring run by Diana and her tight-lipped circle of old money allies. I stared at my own face. Cropped, filtered, and prostituted for optics. The necklace had captured so much, but it hadn't caught this. This was deeper and dirtier. So I turned the system on itself. I embedded a modified firmware Jonah coded into the smart security of the Wellington estate. I waited until one of their monthly Legacy Circle meetings, a gathering of tech moguls, ex-politicians, and billionaires who prided themselves on never appearing on public donor lists. I let the AI observe. I recorded conversations filtered by voice print and emotional inflection. I watched Diana boast about how the digital Olivia is more useful than the real one ever was. And then I saw her, Harper, Ethan's sister, sitting at the head of a smaller table, separate from the main gathering, presenting a deck titled Oblivion Services. Slides showed timelines, faces, contracts. She was running a team that specialized in erasing people, digitally, reputationally, completely. They don't just disappear, she said calmly. They become unverifiable. No history, no credentials, no trace. It's cleaner than litigation, safer than assassination. The men around her nodded in quiet approval. That night, I checked my professional credentials. My teaching license showed revoked. My university degree was marked unconfirmed. Even my high school transcript came back with a 404 error. I had been deleted. The next morning, I tried booking a hotel under a pseudonym. The reservation system flagged my biometric data. My rideshare app returned an identity not authenticated notice. I couldn't even get on a train. It's begun, Jonah said grimly when I told him. They've initiated Oblivion Protocol. They're erasing you from the usable system. Your name will be flagged anywhere it might resurface. How do I fight something no one can see? I asked. He looked me dead in the eye, by making it impossible to ignore. We moved fast. Jonah helped me create a data leak, carefully packaged documents, video clips, donation logs, wire transfers, all tied to fake charities linked to the Wellington name. We didn't release it outright. We sent it to 3 investigative journalists with proven integrity and a taste for risk. Within 48 hours, the first article dropped. Digital Assassination: How the Elite Are Erasing People for Profit. It exploded. Social media caught fire. Hashtags, think pieces, victims coming forward. The Oblivion network was real, and I had cracked it open. Diana tried to deny everything, but her voice was in the recordings. Harper's presentation went viral, turned into memes, then into protests. Sponsors dropped their names from events. Corporate allies vanished overnight. But it wasn't revenge. Not really. It was survival. And then, while the Wellingtons scrambled, I received an encrypted message from a finance firm I once invested in, long before I met Ethan. A forgotten venture capital fund I had quietly seeded years ago, under my maiden name, had just triggered a controlling stake acquisition in a regional banking group. Jonah confirmed it first. "You're now the majority shareholder," he said slowly, "of Chariton Bank." I blinked. That's the bank the Wellingtons borrowed from for their expansion project. He grinned. "Correction, that's the bank that holds their mortgage." I could have crushed them with a single signature. The bank contracts were airtight. One click and their estate would have gone into default. But I didn't. Not yet. I wanted answers. Power means little without understanding. And somewhere inside the wreckage of their cruelty, I needed to know, why me? Why all this energy just to erase someone like me? So I went digging, not into systems, but into people. Diana Wellington wasn't always the queen of legacy dinners and iron-tongued traditions. Decades ago, she had been the young second wife of a senator, climbing her way into rooms that weren't built for her. And once she arrived, the other women, those with family money and old names, called her a climber, a fraud, a danger. Her retaliation was silence. She learned to play the long game to survive it. Then she became it. Women like me had once threatened her. Now we were to be neutralized before we could become competition. I saw it clearly in the photos, in the old interviews, in the look she gave me on our first lunch, like she'd seen a version of herself she couldn't allow to exist again. Understanding that didn't bring forgiveness, but it gave me clarity. While the public raged over the revelations, I restructured. My stake in Chariton Bank gave me more than access. It gave me vision. I assembled a quiet team of forensic accountants and social equity lawyers. We began a full review of the Wellington real estate portfolio, targeting every mortgage tied to ethically questionable practices. There were dozens. Every file bore their seal. Every clause stacked against tenants and first-time buyers. Every loophole designed to grow power through quiet exploitation. I didn't fire back with revenge. I rewrote the rules. On a Tuesday morning, I received a single-line email from the Wellington legal team. "We request negotiation. What do you want?" I stared at the screen for a long time, then closed the laptop. I already had what I wanted, but the world didn't. So I went public. No masks, no voice changers, just me. I recorded a special episode of The Algorithmic Wife, this time with my face in full frame. I talked about trust, about systems that punish women for being intelligent, emotional, defiant, about marriages where money becomes a leash, about how artificial intelligence is only as toxic as the data we feed it, and that we've been feeding it patriarchy, fear, and silence. It wasn't a confession, it was a confrontation. Within a day, it hit 10 million views. Within a week, it became a movement. Olivia Uncaged trended across platforms. Letters poured in. Women sent audio messages, court documents, screenshots. Men, too. Those who had been erased or gaslit by institutions meant to protect them. People weren't just angry, they were awake. And somewhere in the midst of that storm, Diana snapped. The live stream alert came in at midnight. Private channel. But my name was tagged. I clicked, heart hammering. She sat alone in the grand dining room, still in pearls, mascara streaked, a glass of wine trembling in her hand. "They made me a villain," she said to the camera. "And she made me irrelevant." I froze. "This legacy..." "It was all I had left," she whispered. "If you're watching, Olivia, congratulations. You've won." My phone rang. Jonah. "She's unstable. Do not engage on camera. I repeat." I was already out the door. By the time I reached the estate, the feed had gone dark. Security let me through. They recognized the name on the bank papers now. I found her in the same chair, clutching a bottle of pills. But she hadn't taken any. Not yet. She looked up, hollow. "You came." I nodded. "Of course I did." She gestured to the empty room. "They all left, every single one. You built a system where loyalty was bought. The moment the check bounced, they cashed out." She didn't respond. I sat across from her, not as a victor, but as a woman who had been there, alone, defeated, terrified. "You're not irrelevant," I said quietly, "but you need to choose who you'll be when the system you built collapses." She didn't cry, but something in her posture softened. We sat in silence. Outside, the world was changing. The fall came faster than anyone expected. Within days of my public appearance, federal investigators raided the Wellington estate. Screens were rolled out, drives confiscated, Diana's charity network was frozen. Ethan, smug to the end, tried to claim ignorance until they showed him the warrant tied to over a dozen accounts under false names. One of them was his. The charges were elegant in their precision: digital fraud, identity laundering, and public deception with intent to manipulate markets. Ethan had built an empire of digital aliases to comment on his own success, promote stock tips, and create the illusion of influence. Just image management, he'd once said. Now it was obstruction. The media called it the masked empire, and in every headline my name appeared, either as whistleblower, opportunist, or cautionary tale. That part I hadn't prepared for. They began to turn on me. Not the elite, but the people. If she knew all this, why wait until she had power to speak? Did she orchestrate this whole thing to steal a bank? Another tech-savvy narcissist weaponizing trauma. At first I ignored them, but then the calls started. Sponsors withdrew from the new equity fund I was launching. The faces of women who had written me letters of support began disappearing from our Slack channels. Board members asked for reputation buffering measures. One morning, I opened my inbox to find a message from a longtime podcast listener. No greeting, just a line. Power corrupts, and you're not immune. I closed the laptop and stared into the space where Jonah used to sit. He was supposed to meet me that day. He didn't show. Hours passed. Calls went to voicemail. By nightfall, I got a text from his sister. 3 words. He's gone. Accident. It didn't make sense. Jonah didn't ride motorcycles. He didn't drink. He always wore a helmet. But the report said, single vehicle collision, head trauma, no foul play suspected. I knew better. 2 days later, I received a file, an encrypted message from Jonah, timestamped 12 hours before his death. It contained only one sentence. You have a leak. Watch your logs. I spent the next 48 hours reviewing access points, login histories, internal comms. At first, nothing. Then, buried deep in a temp server, I found a forwarded batch of documents. Memos from our boardroom, private emails, even the outline of the next podcast episode, sent to a dummy address tied to the Wellington Investment Fund. One name came up again and again. Zoe. She was young, ambitious, hired 6 months ago as a communications analyst. She had a story that reminded me of my own. A scholarship girl, smart, hungry. I took her under my wing. I told her everything. She listened, smiled, nodded, and delivered it all back to my enemies. The rage was cold, not explosive, not cinematic, just heavy. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I traced the data she leaked. Every byte was timed precisely, not just for sabotage, but to sync with something else. A financial merger, Sheridan Bank, the institution I controlled, was suddenly the subject of an unsolicited acquisition offer. The bid came from an obscure holding company with offshore funding. At first glance, it looked random, but I recognized the shell. It was connected to a legacy trust under Diana Wellington's maiden name. She wasn't defeated. She was repositioning. By consolidating power quietly, she'd set up a new entity to swallow mine whole. She didn't need to own my name. She needed to own the infrastructure I rebuilt. If the merger went through, I'd lose voting control. Sheridan would become part of a megabank portfolio, and every equity-based policy I'd enacted, microloans for marginalized women, bias audits, and AI lending, would be overwritten within a quarter. It was checkmate. Unless I made a move she didn't see coming. But first, Zoe. I called a meeting under the guise of a crisis briefing. She entered the room calm, clipboard in hand. She didn't flinch when I locked the door behind us. You chose them, I said. Her eyes didn't waver. You're no different than they are. You think I built all this to be different? I didn't. I built it because no one else would. You built it to win, she snapped. Just like them. You erased people too. You let Jonah take the fall because he was convenient. You're not clean. For a moment I saw it. Not hatred, not envy, belief. Zoe had been radicalized not by power, but by disillusionment. She thought she was saving something, undoing me before I became the next Diana. I didn't scream. I didn't defend myself. I just watched her walk out, knowing she still believed she'd done the right thing. Later that night, I stared at the merger proposal on my desk. The deadline loomed. My lawyers said there was no way to block it without public fallout or massive buyouts I couldn't afford. Outside, a storm rolled in. Inside, I started writing a new episode, not to explain, not to confess, to burn the whole thing down. I disappeared on a Tuesday, deleted my verified accounts, wiped all public-facing digital traces. I de-indexed articles, rejected interviews, ghosted speaking invitations. I filed an official data obfuscation request under the right-to-be-forgotten laws in 5 jurisdictions. Within 72 hours, Olivia Carter was algorithmically extinct. The name that once trended worldwide no longer existed. I used the quiet that followed to rebuild, not in defiance, but in design. I became Ilera Phi, a name without a backstory, just a pulse. The company I founded this time had no logos, no faces, no founders. It lived entirely on the dark edge of the open web, an encrypted community platform where no one used real names, no one revealed origins, just stories, truths that didn't need evidence because they echoed like scars across thousands of lives. Women wrote about being cut off from bank accounts after arguments, about digital contracts with morality clauses buried in fine print, about photos taken without consent, doctored into porn, circulated at work, about being flagged by credit scoring AI as emotionally unstable and denied home loans. No leaders, no brand, just a vault of collective voices. We called it null space. It didn't take long before the media noticed the platform's explosive engagement, but they had no one to question, no company to subpoena. Null space operated like breath, untraceable, unowned. We fed no algorithm and we owed no explanation. The users called me E. That was all I ever gave them. Until one day a package arrived. Plain white envelope, no return address. Inside, a badge, matte black, with a red dot in the center. Beneath it, a handwritten note. TED Global invites you to speak under any name you choose. But the world still remembers Olivia Carter. Do you? I stared at the dot for a long time. A year ago, I would have laughed, or burned it, or sent Jonah a picture of it with a sarcastic caption. But Jonah was gone, and so was Zoe, and maybe so was the part of me that once needed to stay hidden. I stared into the mirror that night, brushing the corners of my jaw with 2 fingers. I hadn't worn makeup in 6 months. I hadn't smiled for an audience in twice that long. You wanted legacy, I whispered to my reflection. Now earn it. The TED stage was smaller than I remembered from the streams, colder, the kind of sterile that only heavy lighting can create. I wore black, no makeup, no jewelry, just my voice. When they introduced me, I walked out slowly, like my body remembered every step of the system that tried to erase it. And then I spoke. I didn't tell a linear story. I told a pattern. I talked about how surveillance doesn't always come from governments or corporations. Sometimes it comes from families, from spouses, from people who say, this is for your own good. I spoke about AI models trained on obedience, about women scored on tone, about how the algorithm doesn't care why you raised your voice. It only cares that you did. I described the prison of being statistically compliant, the way silence is rewarded and anger is criminalized in code. I talked about Jonah, about what we built, about what it cost. I didn't mention Ethan, or Diana, or Harper. They were never the story. The audience didn't clap at first. They listened, rigid, breathing shallow. Every light in the house was silent. Then I ended with the words that had haunted me since this all began. They said I'd disappear without their money, I said, and they were right. Pause. I disappeared and came back owning the system. There was no roar, no thunder of applause, just stillness. Then a single voice from the back. Thank you. And another. That was mine, too. And another, "We see you." I didn't cry, but I wanted to. The clip went viral within hours, not just on mainstream platforms, but across every mirror network, across every encrypted feed. Someone printed the quote on posters in Nairobi. A girl in Seoul painted it on a wall. A journalist in Sao Paulo closed her article with it. A dozen tech companies released transparency statements the following week. At least 4 pulled back. Planned AI integrations. A Senate subcommittee held a hearing titled Digital Consent in Financial Contracts. I wasn't invited. I didn't need to be. Legacy isn't a headline. It's a ripple. And the system, the one that once fed on silence, now echoes with names it can't bury.